A mountain man lived off the land, alone, without help, without breaks. Every task meant something: eat or go hungry, patch or freeze, sharpen or die dull. But what did it actually take to survive a full day in the wild? And how did he cook, trap, tan, patch, clean, and survive? Every single day? Today we go inside the cabin, hour by hour, task by task, no myths and no reenactments, just the real routine. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. Part 1. Pre-dawn. The dark forest pressed in hard. Wind whispered through the pines slowly, dragging frost from the branches like breath from a sleeping beast. Somewhere out there, a branch snapped. Inside, the cabin felt more like a cave than shelter. Fire had long since burned down, just a faint red glow buried under ash. The air wasn't sharp enough to bite, but deep enough that it settled in the cracks and crept through the moss-stuffed chinks. This kind of cold crouched. It didn't scream. And under a mess of buffalo hides, old wool, and a faded Hudson's Bay blanket, the mountain man didn't move. Not yet. He just lay there, still, alert, breath rising in pale puffs. You don't bolt upright in the wilderness unless you've got a reason. So you listen first. For an owl, for a fox. A silence meant nothing moved except the dark. And now he'd stir slow. One leg, then the other. Feet hit the dirt with a quiet thud. The floor was hard-packed earth, always cold. He wore long johns, flannel soaked with years of sweat and smoke. His rifle stood arm's reach from the cot. His hatchet was buried in the stump by the hearth. Everything in the cabin had a place, and every place had a reason. He reached for the lantern. It was an old tin thing, sheltering the flicker out of habit. It lit nothing but his boots. The deerskin flap that passed for a door twitched in the breeze, letting in the sharp breath of pine and cold. He crouched by the hearth, shoulders hunched. With a shallow breath, he'd blow softly across the coals. No rush. Fire hates a rush. Pine shavings, bark curls, twigs. The coals caught slow. Then came a sparkle. Then flame. Then light. Heat eased out inch by inch. Smoke found its way up through the chimney gap. If the draft held, it'd go. If not, it'd drop back down and stain the rafters like it had before. He didn't bother with it. You didn't fight the cabin. You learned to live with it. The place was small, barely bigger than a freight wagon. It had one room, no windows, one low cot. Shelves hammered straight into the log walls with split saplings. On them, cornmeal, flour, dried apples, salt pork, jerked meat wrapped in old rags, a couple of tin pots, a powder horn, a mold for casting round ball, a squat iron kettle. Everything smelled like smoke and sweat and time. He then rubbed his hands by the fire. Breath still puffed white. Eyes glanced to the ceiling. Then the wall, then nowhere. He was tracking something, thinking through yesterday's trap lines. The ones near the creek bend, the deadfall past the ridge. He saw them clear in his head. Stakes, snares, bait lines. Had the bait frozen? Had the beavers moved downstream? Could be. That last freeze laid ice thick enough to walk or fall through. Hard to tell. He grabbed the water bladder and dumped it into the kettle. If it wasn't frozen solid, it'd warm fast. If it was, he'd cut it out in chunks. He looked around again. No coffee. That was gone weeks back. Instead, he pulled sassafras bark from a pouch. Root brew wasn't much, but it was hot, and it burned its way down just fine. He cracked his shoulders loose and made a round of the cabin. Flint was tight on the lock. Powder horn sealed, knife still sharp, gloves dry. He put on his boots, buckled his belt, then continued inspecting his cabin. Horn spoon, patch knife, bag of lead, and patching cloth, everything's where it should be. By the door, a strip of pemmican hung like old leather. He sawed off a chunk, then chewed on it slowly. Same knife for everything, same silence in the room. He stared ahead, thinking terrain, how far he'd go, what to avoid, where the sign might be better. Then he stepped outside. Not far, just enough to breathe it in. The crusted snow crunched under his boots. Trees stood tall and still, black silhouettes. The sky was still dark but softening at the rim, stars fading behind a pale frost. Nothing moved, not yet. Back inside, the fire cracked louder now. It filled the room with orange light and spit warmth into the cold corners. He sat down, wrapped fingers around the tin mug, and sipped the bark brew. The taste was rough, but it warmed him. And that's how a mountain man's day started. Now, if you want to see how mountain men built those log cabins from scratch, we've got a full episode on that, so don't miss it. Part 2. Morning. He'd already chewed through a strip of pemmican and finished off the last of his sassafras brew, just enough to wake the gut. Now, it was time for real food. The fire popped. Heat licked the skillet as the mountain man slapped down thick slices of salt pork. No ceremony, just the morning grind. The fat hissed, spit into the flames, smoke swirling through the cabin like a signal from yesterday. That grease was gold. It kept things cooking, kept things moving. And beside the fire, he slid a chunk of cold cornbread onto a hot stone. Last of the cornmeal. It was dry and plain, but it filled the belly and held the line. The smell hit first: pork, wood smoke, and warmth. Breakfast in the wilderness wasn't much, but it stuck with you. Moments later, with his belly full, he pulled on his buckskin coat and tied the moccasins tight. No buttons, no buckles, just soft leather made for slipping quiet through the brush. He then stepped into the chill once more, air sharp enough to bite. He moved slow, careful, feet finding the same frozen path he took every morning to the stream. He then reached the stream. Cold mist hovered above the water. His trap sat half submerged, iron jaws clamped open, waiting. He checked them one by one. These were heavy, double-spring footholds, anchored to saplings he'd driven into the riverbank days ago. The bait, castor, musky oil from beaver glands, stored in carved wooden cups. Nasty smell, but it worked. And if you're curious about the traps themselves, we've got a full episode breaking down every type mountain men used. We've also got another deep dive on the hunting methods they used to track, stalk, and take game in the wild. So check those out if you haven't already. And now, back to it. After inspecting his traps, the mountain man crouched, hands wet, and reset a sprung trap. He stepped into the water, masking his scent, washing himself from the land. Beavers were smart. Smell the wrong thing, and they'd disappear. Also, before heading back, he'd splash water over his footprints. It was a small trick, but it kept him invisible. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, smoke drifted from the chimney like a fading breath. The world was waking. A loon called somewhere beyond the trees. Leaves rustled with something unseen. Another day, another start. Next, he eyes a trail that wound through roots and stones, slick with dew along the stream. Nothing new, but still no place to lose focus. The weight of the knife on his belt, tomahawk across his back, and musket in his arm grounded him. At the stream's edge, he crouched. Water whispered past. A fish jumped. A frog splashed. But he was watching for other signs like shaved stumps, chewed saplings, slick slide marks shaped into the mud. Beavers had been busy. Good. He leaned down, still set. No movement, no bite. He frowned for half a second, then reset the brush and moved the trap just enough to cover it better. And now, nothing to do but move on. The next trap was near a willow patch, close to a lodge. Mud held fresh web tracks. He knelt. The chain was tight. Something was down there. He held it, then pulled it up slow. Water poured off the dark fur. The beaver kicked weakly, almost spent. Then, with one clean and quick strike, the struggling stopped. The mountain man whispered thanks under his breath, and that wasn't for show. He studied the pelt. It was thick, prime, would fetch a solid price back east. Thereafter, he reset the trap and camouflaged it with fresh mud and twigs before smearing more castoreum. Then he strapped the beaver to his pack. Trap by trap, he moved down the line. Some were full, some empty. He worked steadily. The sun edged higher, melting the cold from his coat. Birds kicked up noise in the trees. Squirrels darted through branches. Life everywhere, rushing beneath the quiet. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The land spoke back in its own ways. You just had to listen. And with the traps behind him and a beaver slung heavy over his shoulder, he turned back toward the cabin. The weight pressed into his back, but he didn't mind. All that mattered was that one more task had been done. One more piece of the grind. Outside the cabin, he hoisted the beaver onto a low-hanging branch. The cool air would keep it fresh until skinning time. No rush. Skinning was a job that needed calm hands and a sharp edge. Sloppy meant wasted pelt, and waste wasn't an option. He then grabbed the bucket by the cabin's entrance and headed for the stream again. He reached the bank, dipped the bucket, and filled it in one clean motion. Cold shot through his fingers, but he didn't care. Back inside, the cabin sat quiet and dim. Light snuck through the log seams in pale streaks. He set the bucket by the hearth where the last embers still glowed. And from the shelf, he pulled down his whetstone. Novaculite, hard, clean, and prized. After all, no trapper worth his salt skimped on his edge. He sat, laid the knife across his lap, bone handle smooth from years of use. He dunked the stone, wetted it good, then drew the blade across in steady strokes. Back and forth. A soft hiss. And when he was done, he tested the edge against his arm. Hair shaved clean. Good enough. He stood and swept the floor with a broom made from tied twigs, brushed away dust, ash, scraps. He then put tools in place, stacked hides, checked the rifle. Everything had its spot, and with things in place, he fed the hearth a few logs. The flame caught, and fire came back slowly, throwing heat into the cabin. He sat again, muscles unwinding. There was no need to speak. The fire did that. Cracks and pops in the quiet, mixing with the sounds of the wild outside. Plenty more to do, but for now, he let the warmth settle in. The day was still young. Part 3, Midday. By noon, his morning traps had paid off. 1 beaver, a fox, and 2 muskrats. Clean kills. He lugged them back without a word, the weight familiar. Outside the cabin, he braced himself for the art of skinning. And so, with knife in hand, he got to work. 1 cut, from tail to lip. Neat, straight. He peeled the hide nice and steady, not rushing the blade. The underfur glowed. This was very valuable. A miscut would cost him. He rolled the carcass, worked the edge, and finished clean. Next, the muskrats, then the fox. Smaller game, different method. He strung each one up by the hind legs, cut around the ankles, and pulled the skin down like peeling a sock. It took force. The skins were delicate. And as always, one tear, and they were worthless. He then laid out each pelt across a wooden frame, lashed tight with rawhide. He leaned the frames against the cabin wall, angled just right to catch sun and breeze. He smoothed out creases, checked for tears, made sure nothing sagged. Those pelts were his currency, his only reason for existing out here. The meat didn't go to waste. Later on, he'd butcher what was left and carve what he needed. The beaver tail, especially, was rich and fatty. This he tossed nearby to prepare after sorting out the hides first. And now, he'll cut a slim willow branch, bend it into a hoop, and then tie it with sinew. The frame would stretch the beaver hide even. He'd do the same for the others. No shortcuts. He took the beaver pelt first, laid it fur down across the willow hoop. And with a bone awl, he punched holes around the edge. Steady hand, even spacing. No guessing. Rawhide strips followed, threaded tight through each hole, lashing the hide flat against the frame. No slack, no wrinkles. Uneven stretch meant rot. Once secure, he leaned the hoop against the cabin wall, angled just right to catch sun and breeze. Same for the muskrat, same for the fox. One pelt, one frame. He ran his hands over each, checking once more for folds or pulls. He then adjusted any tension and rechecked. Drying usually took days, and in that time, he'd keep watch. Sunlight, airflow, and patience did the work, but only if you kept an eye on them. One careless day, and a pelt could spoil. But in the meantime, with the hide set, he turned to the enticing meat. As mentioned earlier, the beaver tail was a fatty, prized delicacy. It got special treatment. The mountain man cleaned it first, then stripped the scaly skin, then scrubbed off the musk, and then into a brine of salt and vinegar overnight. Soak it right, and it'll cook clean. And tomorrow, he'd simmer it slow with baking soda to soften the flesh. Then pan-fry it in butter, mustard, and a splash of wine. A rare feast indeed. Rich, heavy, real frontier comfort food. The rest of the meat, lean cuts from the beaver, muskrat, and fox, he sorted and trimmed. Some he'd eat now. The rest needed to last. So he prepped the smokehouse. It was basically a squat log hut, mud-packed to hold in heat. Inside, he tied strips of meat to wooden beams. There, he'd space them wide. No crowding. Good air meant good curing. Then he lit the pit and fed it hickory and applewood. The smoke climbed gently, wrapping the meat in a rich, sharp scent. That fire would smolder for days. The smoke would preserve and flavor every bite. But for now, the day was still young, and there was plenty of work left to do. Part 4, Afternoon. The sun hung low, cutting through pine and aspen with hard gold light. Somewhere in the trees, a bird called once and went quiet. At some point, the mountain man spotted game nearby and decided to head out for a quick hunt, planning to return before sunset. He paused for a moment. He then took in the sprawl of forest, the layered greens, the patchy brown, the boundless wild. The sun said he had hours to work. And so he aimed for a game trail he knew by heart, one worn into the woods by hooves and habit. The path narrowed quick. Laurel and chokecherry leaned in, branches clawing. He ducked low, moving quietly. Ball of the foot first, no slapping heels. His breath stayed relaxed, drawn deep through his nose, pine, wet moss, rot, and something else. A musk? Faint? Animal? Recent? He froze, dropped into a crouch, not thinking, just knowing. His eyes scanned the ground. There, under a fern, a print, small, sharp, missable if you weren't looking. He eased one knee into the dirt, hand hovering just above. Cloven, wide set, Whitetail, probably a doe, maybe not alone. He didn't guess how fresh, he only felt it. Edges soft, still wet, no crumble. Pine needles hadn't lifted back yet. She ran, not walked. He moved, half rising, eyes sweeping left. The tree line was still holding its breath. The tracks angled south-southeast, slipping down a shallow draw. Smart move, cover all around, easy slope, wind at her back. But the wind was unpredictable, whirling through trees. That gave him the edge. She wouldn't catch his scent unless it turned. And so he moved again, this time slower. Rifle cradled now, not slung. Left hand clearing bramble, guiding his way. Every 10 steps, stop, listen. There's always some squirrel rattling, some jay screaming. But when the woods go still, that's when it matters. Then, sign. Birch bark, scraped, not grazed, but chewed. Thin vertical grooves where deer teeth stripped the outer layer. The sap was still wet. She'd been feeding. She wasn't spooked yet. She was still close. The mountain man dropped low. He pressed a palm into a shaken patch of trail. He brought his fingers to his nose. Strong scent. Bitter. She'd bedded here, maybe an hour ago, likely heading toward water. Suddenly, he veered off trail. No straight pursuit. A trapper once told him, "Don't follow the deer. Flank the memory of where it went." So, he arced wide, gaining elevation. The rise gave him a view down the draw. Wind cut across his face. Perfect. Then, he stopped. Movement. Barely there. A twinkle behind young aspen. And with that, raised his rifle smoothly and silently, without thought. No, it wasn't the doe. This was a yearling, small and twitchy, nibbling moss off a fallen log. Its legs were stiff, ears flicked, but it was calm. The mountain man held his breath. He didn't shoot. Not yet. The doe might be near. It might circle back. So he stayed still, eyes scanning every shadow, locking in every crack and movement in the land. A few paces off, another patch caught his eye. Leaves stripped, stems snapped, hooves deep in the soil. This time, it was a bigger print. Different story. He knelt by the brush, studying bite marks high up the branches. Nope, it wasn't deer. It was elk. Fresh. The mountain man changed course again, quietly and quickly. Another trail, another sign. And maybe, this time, meat. The slope turned mean. Vines snagged his legs. Ferns whipped his thighs. Every step fought him, the ground loose with rock and thick roots waiting to trip. He then moved slow and quiet, boots dodging dry twigs, eyes fixed on the ground ahead. The woods spoke, but he filtered it all out. The breeze, the bird calls, the twitch of branches overhead. What mattered was closer. A snap twig, a hair tuft caught in bark, musk on the wind. Each one whispered the same thing. He's close. Light dappled the trail in broken patches. So he kept climbing. Then, an opening. The trees thinned. A trail curved along the ridge. He stepped onto it, every muscle braced, every sense sharp. The wind shifted, and with it, scent. He froze. Something moved ahead, there. Behind a curtain of brush, an elk. Big, a bull. Antlers high, glinting with light. It grazed, unaware. The mountain man raised his Hawken rifle slow and steady. He took aim, held his breath, trigger ready. Then the wind betrayed him. The elk jerked upright, sniffing, ears twitching, eyes locking straight through the cover. Crash. It vanished in a heartbeat, branches snapping, hooves pounding. The mountain man didn't move, however. He simply lowered the rifle, exhaled, and listened. The hunt wasn't over. It only changed shape. He turned and tracked back, eyes scanning for fresh sign. The forest gave way to open light. A clearing spread out wide, basked in afternoon sun. He moved low, tight to the ground, moccasins brushing soft against the earth. Up ahead, a downed log. He dropped behind it. He waited. He watched. A herd, elk again. Moving slow through tall grass, coats blending into the golden meadow. The bull trailed behind. It had broad shoulders, antlers like a crown. The mountain man steadied his rifle. One breath in. Silence. Then, crack. The shot echoed like thunder through timber. The bull stumbled, legs folding, then dropped. The herd scattered, melting into trees. He didn't chase. He only listened and waited, then stood. He walked to the bull. It lay still. He knelt, nodded once, not out of pride, but respect. The meat would feed him, the hide would keep him warm, and nothing was taken lightly out here. If it were small game, he'd have hauled it back whole. But this bull? No chance. This had to be done right here. And so he pulled his Green River knife and got to work. From the sternum up, one clean cut. No rushing, no mess. He avoided the guts, slicing with care. His fingers slipped between skin and meat, knuckling efficiently and as fast as he could. Hide peeled back in sheets, red muscle steaming in the chill. He then laid the hide aside, good for tanning later. He then reached in, pulled organs loose, setting the liver and heart off to one side. Food? The rest? Trap bait. Something would come sniffing soon enough. He continued to move fast, but clean. Shoulders, hindquarters, back straps. He carved the meat off bone, trimming fat, keeping only what mattered. Nothing wasted, nothing left to rot. Every cut counted. He packed the meat into a parfleche, which was rawhide stitched tight. The load needed to sit right on the back, or it'd tear his shoulders up before sundown. As for the rest, bones, scraps, blood, he left behind. The woods would eat well tonight. Foxes, ravens, maybe even a bear. And now he stood, back tight, hands slick with animal blood. His muscles were sore, but the weight on his back felt right. This was hard-earned. And with that, he turned toward home. The forest glowed gold. The ground was still wet from the last rain. Each step sank just enough to leave a mark. He kept an eye out for forage. He was always looking. A patch of serviceberry stopped him. Blue clusters hung on the branches. He plucked a few, popped them in his mouth. They were sweet, with a bite. Good balance after meat and blood. He took more, enough to dry later. He remembered the Blackfeet, how they'd mash these berries with fat and dried meat, pemmican, fuel for winter. That kind of knowledge didn't die out here. It stayed alive in the hands that used it. He then wiped his hands on his leggings, adjusted the parfleche, and moved on quietly, half full and ready for night. He pushed through the timber. However, his legs followed his nose. Wild onions, he could smell it. Their bite hit before he saw them. They smelled sharp and earthy, tangling in the breeze. At the meadow's edge, light blossoms swayed above thin green stalks, standing tall among the grass. He knelt. He dug slow with a short stick, prying bulbs from soft, wet soil. Then, one by one, clean work, no waste. In minutes he had a handful, enough to spike a stew, soothe the gut, or fight off fever. Old wisdom, not his alone. This was knowledge forged from the land, passed hand to hand, long before he got here. Thereafter, he stood and gave the woods a quick look. Birds chirped, leaves flew. Life moved all around him, mostly unseen. And with the onions wrapped and stashed, he turned back toward the cabin. Same path, same steps, but never safe. He moved like he always did, quiet, alert, every sense on edge. Out here, you don't get lazy. The minute you do, you become extinct. And by the time he hit the clearing, the sun had dipped. Back to the cabin at last. Part 5. Evening. With night creeping in, he barred the entrance and stowed his gear. He then got to work. Service berries, spread out to dry. Onions, rinsed in creek water and diced down fast. Then came the meat. He checked the beaver tail he'd hung earlier, still firm, fat, ready for prep. That would soak overnight. Tomorrow's prize. But the elk? That couldn't wait. He sorted it fast. What to dry, what to smoke, what to cook now. Tonight's stew would be simple. Wild onions, a handful of berries, and lean cuts from the day's snare. He dropped it all into the pot, stirred once. The rich, earthy scent rose up. Smoke coiled through the cabin, making its way up the chimney. And while the stew cooked, he moved to the next job. First, his tools. He wiped down the knife, still streaked from the kill. Then came the whetstone. Slow strokes, back and forth. A dull blade was dead weight. He never carried dead weight. Then, bullets, lead chunks dropped into the ladle. The coals did their work. The metal turned into dark, glossy, lively liquid. He poured it slow into the mold with steady hands, no rush. He then clipped the sprue and let it cool. One round at a time. And with dusk settling in, he sat cross-legged by the fire, bowl in hand. The stew was ready, meat turned soft, onions went sweet, berries thickened into a dark, tangy punch. He ate slow, no rush, just heat, salt, and the weight of a hard day boiled down to one meal. Afterward, he brewed tea from cherry bark. Bitter stuff, but it kicked the chill out and cleaned the blood. He sat by the fire, hands wrapped around the tin cup, back sore but upright. The forest came alive again, insects buzzing low, owl calling once, far off. The wind moved through the pines like a slow breath. Somewhere, a coyote cried. The mountain man listened without looking. He cherished these sounds. They were part of the deal. But peace didn't mean pause. Out here, stillness was the signal to get things done. And so, he leaned forward, grabbed the first rifle, and went back to work. First, the Hawken. Long-barreled, .50 caliber percussion cap. This baby was his lifeline, his law. He laid it across his knees and began the ritual. A strip of scorched linen, dipped in bear oil, slid down the bore. He wiped the lock clean, checked the nipple, and cleared the flash channel with a fine brass wire. It hadn't misfired in months, thankfully, and he planned to keep it that way. Oh, and by the way, if you want to see exactly how that Hawken rifle worked, we've got a full episode on it on our channel. So don't miss it after this one. In the meantime, however, the mountain man put aside his Hawken and grabbed his older rifle, a flintlock, worn smooth from years in the bush. First, he checked the frizzen, scraped carbon from the pan, and ran a wire through the touch hole. The flint was still sharp, but he gave it a few strokes on the stone anyway. Better safe than empty. With both cleaned and checked, he set them aside and turned back to the fire. The tools were ready, the rifles were primed, but the body had its own upkeep. His hands were next, sore from the day, knuckles split, fingers blistered. He poured bear grease into his palm, added powdered balsam sap, and rubbed it in. The mix stung. It smelled like pine pitch and earth, but it kept the rot out. It kept him working. Afterward, he leaned back. The days come to an end at last. But then he paused. Had he forgotten firewood? His eyes darted to the corner, and there it was, stacked high. He'd done a double chore the day before, enough wood to last almost 3 days. He exhaled slow. No rush tonight. There was nothing left to do. Just breathe and be ready for whatever came next.